An interesting question is, how has the Pakistan Army managed to retain its credibility despite its many failures? The low points for the Army were after the 1965 and especially the 1971 war, post-Kargil, at the end of Musharraf's rule, the U.S. raid on Abbottabad, at the end of General Kiani's extended tenure, and so on. Every time, however, the Army has bounced back. The short answer has to be the weaknesses of the politicians who were unable to capitalize on the opportunities that were provided to cut the Army down to size. There have been at least 3 occasions when elected prime ministers could have taken firm control of the Army and clipped its wings. On all 3 occasions, the civilians failed. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had the best opportunity of taking the Army head-on and cutting it down to size in the wake of the Army's humiliating defeat to India in 1971, when its macho image was destroyed and its reputation was at an all-time low. As Ziering puts it, at the end of Yahya's tenure, Pakistan was even more moth-eaten than at the time of partition. The Pakistan Army, the recipient of the greater portion of resources, lay in a shambles, even more demoralized than the general population. Bhutto was also inclined to do so. In 1966, in London, Tariq Ali had asked Bhutto why he had embroiled the country in an unwinnable war, 1965. The reply, says Tariq Ali, was breathtaking. It was the only way to weaken the bloody dictatorship. The regime will crack wide open soon. Likewise, in 1968, during the student uprising, Bhutto promised the students that after the people's victory, they would dress the generals in skirts and parade them through the streets like performing monkeys. However, according to Ziering, Bhutto was too close to the disaster that engulfed the former Pakistan to understand the significance of the dismemberment. It must be remembered that Bhutto declared Pakistan had been saved on his return to Karachi from Dhaka the day after the Pakistan Army attacked the precincts of Dhaka University. Moreover, Bhutto's attitude towards India was similar to that of the Army. He was blinded by his hatred for India and was determined to continue the confrontation. After all, he had famously remarked, "If India builds the bomb, we will eat grass and leaves for 1,000 years, even go hungry, but we will get one of our own." It was this imperative of pursuing an anti-India policy that made him need the Army rather than trim it down to size. What Bhutto did was to insert a legal deterrence in the shape of Article 6 of the 1973 Constitution, which prescribed capital punishment for any attempt to overthrow or subvert the Constitution in any way. However, this did not prevent his overthrow by Zia. As Akun notes, the armed forces are trained and programmed to unquestioning obedience. So when an order comes down the proper chain of command, the man who is to carry it out is unlikely to check it first with his copy of the Constitution. Nawaz Sharif had the second opportunity when Musharraf was discredited as army chief for the failure of the Kargil intrusions in 1999. Instead of taking action against Musharraf immediately, Nawaz waited for 6 months, by which time Musharraf had bounced back through a massive media campaign that it was Nawaz who had let the army and the country down. Finally, Zardari as president and Gilani as prime minister had another opportunity on 2nd May 2011 when the U.S. killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, followed very soon by the attack on the Mehran naval base on 22nd May 2011. The events were a disaster for the Army. Then there were many in Pakistan who felt that either the Army knew and had hid Osama or that it was an incompetent and dysfunctional army. This led to questions like whether such an army should be entitled to massive chunks of the budget. In either case, a bold civilian government should have taken the Army to task, and the Army Chief and DG Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, should have been sacked to set an example of civilian supremacy. But this was not to be. Like after the 1971 debacle when the Army got its media lackeys to turn the tables on Bhutto, here too, the talk show hosts started questioning the U.S. violation of Pak sovereignty. Thus, PM Gilani had the mortification of having to threaten the U.S. a few days after the raid. The Army has developed tremendous expertise in manipulating the media. The ISPR, the media wing of the Army, knows which journalists will do their bidding. In fact, it is the media talk shows that first create an environment of uncertainty and rumor mongering fear-mongering, which is then capitalized by disgruntled politicians with a nod from the army. In terms of using social media, the army is miles ahead of the civilian government. The impression that has been created by the slick use of the media, especially the social media, is of a selfless army making sacrifices for the sake of the safety of civilians. This is contrasted with the selfish and corrupt politicians who are busy lining their pockets than in improving the lives of the people. Given the misgovernance by politicians, it did not take the army very long to project itself as the only functional organization in the country, an organization that the people could look to in times of dire need. In other words, to regain its mystique as a mythical entity, a magical force. Additionally, despite its reverses, at no point in time has the Army's access to budgetary resources or its control over defense, foreign and security policies ever been questioned by politicians. While the Army has certainly bounced back after every disaster to reclaim its mystique, a moot question is the credibility of the Army leadership within the Army. At times, Army officers themselves have challenged the quality of military leadership. For example, military leadership has been described in a paper by a senior officer at the National Defense Complex, NDC, as inept and weak. We have no vision and perspective of the future, and thus live on a day-to-day basis. The author goes on to cite lack of creativity because of bondage to standard operating procedures, sycophancy, conformity, and careerism. This has also been confirmed by Brian Cloughley, who observes that if the students of Staff College devoted more time to genuine study and original thought, rather than, many of them, but not all, it must be said, attempting to acquire past year's papers and identify correct solutions, then they and the Army would benefit greatly. There is too much activity that takes place for the sake of appearing energetic and not enough quiet, thoughtful hard work. One reason Cloughley identifies for this was that Zia encouraged rote learning of religious detail at the expense of intellectual probings and teaching of English. This has also been confirmed by Iqbal Akhund, who noted that under Zia, the Islamic element was given greater prominence in the courses taught at military academies and other training institutions, whereas there were no courses on subjects of contemporary importance, such as development economics or international economic relations. As a result, standards in many of the most prestigious schools have been permitted to fall to levels that would have been unthinkable only 20 years ago. Some below-standard young men join the Army as officer cadets. Unless the trend is reversed, with a combination of an inept civilian leadership and an inept military leadership, Pakistan's march towards the abyss is assured.